So after half an hour of holding a blowtorch about 50 mil from that hempcrete block, I could still hold my hand and I could barely feel just a tiny bit of warmth coming through. For me, it was just like not just the non combustibility, but the fact that it didn't allow radiant heat to come through makes it really ideal material to use in high bushfire areas.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Hello and welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington.
How are you doing, Zach?
I'm well. It is sunny today, which is has been a rare thing in Seattle. So makes everything easier to navigate.
Nice. Everything else being just everything else, which
yeah.
Let's just talk about the weather in America.
Exactly. Right.
It's good to be back. There is some really cool stuff, and I'm hoping we can distract you from other things going on.
Thank you.
Near you and around the world at the moment, because there are some really cool things going on. I've actually had quite a cool week going out and see some pretty cool building sites, including a fantastic project built by some high school kids, which is encouraging kids to think about trades and building as a viable career option. And I'm quite passionate about that, because I feel like a lot of our students, teenagers, are more and more forced or think they're being forced into university or college after school. And they don't all need to be doing degrees and racking up lots and lots of student debt. Doing an apprenticeship is a really, really important and viable option. So plus the fact that this particular house was a really high performance house, had lots of great features like air tightness and a fantastic heat recovery ventilation system. And that was all done as a retrofit into an existing house. So pretty amazing project. And I hope that will be lots of inspiration to other people in the industry in this part of the world, because I know that similar projects like that happen elsewhere, but it was really cool. And it certainly brightened up my week, being around those students and some of the people involved in that project.
That's fantastic. And for me, this interview actually was quite inspiring. So that was really nice.
Good.
As well.
Good.
I really enjoyed it.
Well, we'll get into that. We're talking Hempcrete this week, and it's pretty phenomenal. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail and see if we can find if there's anything not to like about Hempcrete. But before we do that, we've got a few people to thank.
Indeed. So a big thank you to all the fine organizations that make our work here at Passive House Accelerator possible. So a big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Thank you too to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Ingui Architecture, Partel, Rockwell North America, and Zola Windows. And thanks to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Cascadia Windows and Doors, European Architectural Supply, Facro, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, LG Air Conditioning Technologies, a new founding or champion sponsor, and Source 2050. As well, a big thank you to Intelligent Membranes for being our sponsor of the week and making our work possible this week.
Thank you very much. All right. Now, Kirstie Wulf is very passionate about working with natural building materials, including hempcrete, light earth, straw bale, mud brick, and what she calls super adobe. She's also a certified passive house designer, and she likes to incorporate those natural materials into her designs and high performance building. She wasn't always doing that. In fact, she started a career and had a successful career as a lawyer, which we talk a little bit about because I was very intrigued how you go from being a lawyer to essentially building your own home with natural materials, which is exactly what Kirstie did. She is based in New South Wales, inland from a couple of hours inland from Sydney. Beautiful part of the world. And I will let her talk a little bit more about that. So here she is, Kirstie Wulf of, well, she's got a couple of organizations. She runs a hemp building directory, and she's also got a natural buildings website, which we'll put links to in the show notes. But for now, here's my interview with Kirstie Wulf. Well, I'm joined by Kirstie Wulf in Australia of Shelter Building Design. Great to see you, Kirstie. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Matthew.
Where in the world are you? Describe to the listeners where you live and in relation to Sydney, I guess.
So I'm based in the Blue Mountains, which is about 2.5 hours, like about 2 hours west of Sydney, and it's the homes of the Durrock and Gundungurra traditional owners, and it's a very beautiful place with lots of sandstone cliffs and lots of bushland. A lot of tourists sort of come up to the Blue Mountains to enjoy the nature.
Pretty harsh climate. You get pretty warm there, but I imagine you get a little bit cool in the wintertime as well.
Blue Mountains is certainly a little bit cooler than Sydney. However, in terms of my projects that I work on, I do projects all around Australia, so dealing with many different climates.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about how you got into building, because you didn't start out in this industry.
That's actually very interesting. So I actually used to work as a lawyer for about 20 years, and I became first interested in building actually through the building of my own mud brick house, which is now 24 years old. Really enjoyed that. Studied some building design, then actually went off and had a child who's now 16, but then started owner building a house, and I've been really passionate about natural building materials, and I've been involved with the Earth Building Association in Australia. And I was looking for, I really wanted to build a house myself. I really enjoyed building. I wanted something which was natural, sustainable, but also doable as an owner builder. And I was reading an article at the time, there was a magazine in Australia called Owner Builder magazine, and they had this article about hempcrete. So I'd actually been doing a lot of research on light earth, which is straw and clay. And I came across hempcrete, which is the internal fibre from the hemp plant mixed with a lime-based binder. And I looked at it and thought, I can do this. So I drew myself up some plans. And then before I really sort of solidified on doing the hempcrete, I took myself off to a course, which was run at that time by the Hemp Masonry Company, and they still do run regular courses. And I thought I can do this. And so I basically built my own hempcrete house. So when I decided to build out of hempcrete, I hadn't realised that there weren't a lot of hempcrete houses in Australia, and that I was actually one of the very early houses. And it became a whole process of educating the council, educating all the trades working on the site, talking to people. And during the process of the build, people would sort of contact me about sort of hempcrete, and they'd often visit, and I had various people help me out. So really enjoyed that process of building, and in the process of that became interested more in hempcrete, and I kept doing more research even as I was building, and then went on to run various workshops and then design hemp houses. So So I think
I feel like we skipped over. You made it sound very easy that suddenly you were building your own house after being a lawyer for 20 years. Not a normal thing for a lawyer to just decide to build their own house. What was all that about?
uh, back when I'd actually built the mud brick house, we had been quite involved and had bagged the walls. I'd done various sort of workshops. I'd been helped out on a couple of straw bale builds. I'd built my own mud brick shed. Um, yeah, I suppose at that point in time, I had done some qualifications in building design. So I
Right.
called a certificate for. Um, but once I finished the Hempcrete place, I actually completed my diploma of building design and decided that that was really my passion and I wanted to start my own business.
So there was obviously an interest there prior to that, that you're sort of interested in working with your hands. Where did that come from?
I think I've always been a creative person. And when I think back to my childhood, I was an avid cubby house maker. So
Yeah,
a weekend spent sort of scavenging building materials and making cubby houses was very my happy place.
love it. Love it. Um, so bit of career change, jumping in, and I love that mindset of I can do this. Was that naive, do you think, at the time, or is that true? Do you think it is something that someone could just jump in and learn and get on with it themselves?
It is interesting because when I was doing that project as owner builder, a lot of people said to me, well, how do you do it? Well, if you look at it as a big project, it can seem quite overwhelming. But if you just sort of break it down into small parts, okay, I just need to get council approval. And once I get council approval, I'll get myself an excavator. And once I do that, you sort of once you break it down into all these sort of smaller parts, it becomes quite doable. I think it's also having the confidence that you can do it.
Yeah, yeah. What are the advantages of hempcrete? Why have you been attracted to using that material?
When I was looking at building my own house, I wanted I had a long-standing passion for natural building materials, and I'm really interested in indoor air quality, low embodied energy. And so I was looking for a building material that I could do myself. I'd done some work with mud brick and I'd made myself half size mud bricks because mud bricks are really heavy. The other problem with mud brick is it's all thermal mass. I wanted something with a bit more insulation. I
Hmm.
looked at materials like straw bale, but what really attracted me to the hempcrete was it was quite compatible with standard building practices. So there's a standard timber frame in the middle. I could get all my services run through first, and the hempcrete in effect is just an infill. So my thoughts as an owner builder were if all else fails, I can always just pull the walls down and make them out of something else. So it
Right.
felt a bit sort of fail safe.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's similar to a lot of straw houses that are non-load bearing, where they're held up essentially by a timber frame, and as you say, it's the infill. Is it? But it's also the exterior surface.
Yeah, so the hempcrete is a single skin wall. So what it is that the hempcrete is on the outside of the building. It covers the timber frame, usually by about 90 or 100 millimetres, goes around the timber frame and then on the inside as well. And then you can either leave it unrendered on the inside. You definitely need it to render it on the outside for weatherproofing. But basically, your wall is a solid hempcrete wall with a timber frame supporting the structure internally.
What do you use on the outside?
We usually use a line render.
And did you apply that yourself, like, manually, just by hand?
Yes.
Um, it's a real paradigm change, or a different paradigm from other passive houses or even high performance houses where it's all about the layers. You know, you've got your air control layer, your vapor control, air tightness, insulation, and then weather protection. And that's one of the not necessarily criticisms, but one of the features of a passive house is that if you look at Joe Steebrook's perfect wall, and it gets more and more complicated as you're trying to do all these things. That's a completely different paradigm to have one material doing all of that stuff.
Well, that was one of the attractions about the hempcrete, is that it creates sort of a bit more of a simplicity in terms of the wall. So the wall, hempcrete is vapor permeable. So that replaces your sort of vapor permeable building wrap. Hempcrete has good insulation. So at 250 millimetre thick wall, you're looking at about R3.5. For a 300 millimetre thick wall, an R4.2, which is really quite good insulation values.
Well, for context, I mean, where does that sit in relation to your requirements for a typical house in your area?
So in Australia, typically we build with timber frame. So, and that timber frame, it can be clad with either brick veneer or a cladding material like weatherboard. So a 90 mil timber frame, the highest insulation value you can fit in there would be a R2.5 bat, and these are all metric. But now they are they also have like R2.7, but that's the most you're going to get, and
Yeah.
that's just the minimum. That's the highest you can fit in those types of houses. So the values we're getting for hempcrete are higher than that, and they can actually meet the requirements of passive houses.
Significantly higher than that. And so you've got your vapor control, you've got your insulation, and then you've got on the outside, you've got your weather protection, and that's the lime render.
Correct. The other good thing about the hempcrete as well, though, is that there is a little bit of thermal mass in there as well. So it's
Yeah.
not just like a lightweight bulk insulation product.
Yeah.
It does hold the heat or cool, as well as the fact that the walls are vapor permeable. That ability to take on and re-release moisture aids in the temperature regulation internally.
And weather tightness, do you need to pay particular attention to, do you have to have extra big eaves to keep the lime render dry? Is it something you're concerned about?
In terms of that, have certainly done some projects that haven't had big eaves, and that's usually been renovations and those types of things. If we don't have good eaves, we generally use a vapor permeable finish on the outside, just to protect that render a little bit more.
Right.
I'm a huge fan of eaves,
Yep.
for not only protecting your walls but for shading.
Yep.
So all of the new houses that I've designed that are hempcrete all have at least 600 millimetre eaves.
Just on that design process, I assume you're doing PHPP, and is that easy to do with a natural product? Like, I'm guessing there's no drop down for hempcrete in PHPP.
But like any material, you basically get the U value for that material. You enter it in. You enter in the thickness of your wall, and just like any other wall build-up, you can do that with PHPP. So I have had my first hempcrete passive house completed,
Nice.
and we got an air change of 0.38. Super happy with that.
Yeah.
We had an experienced passive house builder doing that, but it was certainly his first hempcrete project.
Right.
Joe Mercica from Blue Eco Homes.
Nice. Yes, been on the show. Had him as a guest before. Where are the challenges for that? I imagine it's fairly standard. You go to junctions with windows and joining those to your walls. Is that the main leakage areas?
In terms of that, we use the internal lime render as our airtight layer.
Yep.
And so it was just basically junctions around the windows, just making sure that they were well done, and things like power points. So where you're bringing your power points, because there's no service cavity. So we just had to make sure a little bit orcon around that, just make sure they were sealed up. But when you're looking at using a material like hempcrete for a passive house, there's actually some significant benefits, particularly in terms of thermal bridging, because the hempcrete actually covers around the whole of the timber frame. You're avoiding that issue with any sort of thermal bridging through that timber frame. And that's not something you're doing specifically for passive house. That's just the nature of the hempcrete material.
Yeah. You're just wrapping the whole thing up.
That's correct.
Do you know if there's any research or any anecdotal evidence of hempcrete or even other natural materials in more extreme events? You mentioned about it modulating humidity and temperature quite well, and that's common with other natural materials like clay with dealing with moisture. But what about extremes? Things like really hot weather, even bushfires, more extreme events. Do you know how natural materials stack up in those situations?
In terms of that, talking about hempcrete specifically, it is non-combustible. So I actually saw a number of tests they've done on the internet where they'll hold a blowtorch up, and someone asked me about that. So I actually got my blowtorch out, set up a hemp
Of
block,
course you did. What every self-respecting lawyer has.
set up a former lawyer,
Former
um,
lawyer, yes.
set up the block in my backyard and videoed it, and I put it online as the most boring video ever. But that
Love
was
it.
the success of it. So
Because it
um,
didn't do anything.
I was only using a 100 mil thick block. So
Yeah.
if you think about that, normally you'd have at least 100 mil between the outside of your wall and your timber frame. So after half an hour of holding a blowtorch about 50 mil from that hempcrete block, I did get a little bit of just singeing immediately where that flame was.
Wow.
I could still hold my hand and I could barely feel just a tiny bit of warmth coming through. So
Wow.
for me, it was just like not just the non-combustibility, but the fact that it didn't allow radiant heat to come through makes
Yeah.
it really ideal material to use in high bushfire areas. And in fact, I've got two projects, one which was just completed at the end of last year and one which is being built right now. And they are two houses that are being rebuilt, having lost them in the 2019 bushfires. So people
Wow.
have lost their homes through bushfire,
Yep.
been looking, saying, look, I want to build back better and I want to build back in a material that is not going to burn. So they've actually built back from hempcrete.
That seems quite significant, that it would be so resilient under those conditions. I mean, it's not surprising. I mean, I've seen growing up in Australia, go to see ruins of houses, and often the only thing left is the chimney, which was, either stone or mud or something, and the rest of the house is long gone. So it's kind of not surprising that a material like that would be so resilient.
The other thing is, and I think where hempcrete sort of sets itself apart from some of the other natural building materials is in terms of flood. So if you do something like light earth, which is clay and straw, it's a physical set. So it goes hard just by drying, whereas the lime and hemp is a chemical set. The lime actually goes back to calcium carbonate, which is limestone. So,
Right.
or something like straw bale, where if it gets wet, it actually can damage it. With
Yep.
hempcrete, if it does get flooded, basically you can just dry it out again, put a fan on it and dry the house out again. So one of the hempcrete installers down in Victoria, he actually had a hempcrete doghouse
Yeah.
backyard. And when we had the floods down there, apparently it was underwater for 6 weeks.
Wow.
When the water finally went down, hosed it out, dried it out, and good to go.
Really? That's quite the test.
And that's sort of like, so in terms of resilience, and I think we need to be building with resilience in mind now, because we just don't know what the future climate's going to be, that we need to think about that with our building materials.
That's very surprising. I wasn't even going to ask you about flooding because I just assumed that it would dissolve. So to have that resilience at both ends of that spectrum, that's pretty incredible. You mentioned lime there. So is there no cement or any other mix in there?
So generally, most of the binders that are used are predominantly lime, and that's builder's lime, not agricultural lime.
Yep.
Um, and they generally will have what they call a pozzolan. Now, they are additives that actually help the lime go off, because otherwise the lime can actually set quite slowly. So there are various different materials that are used as pozzolans. Some products will use a little bit of cement as their pozzolan.
Yep.
There's a number of proprietary hempcrete binders that are available on the market. Um, Most of the council approved structures that are built out of hempcrete will usually use one of the proprietary binders, and that's because they have the research behind them and the paperwork which enables you to get building code approval.
Right. Yep. And what about, you mentioned embodied carbon. Do these products have EPCs, or were you able to get embodied carbon data?
Yep, so there has been a bit of research done in terms of the embodied carbon, and different methodologies have come out sort of slightly different, because the carbon in the hemp fibre itself is sort of locked away when it's in
Yeah.
yes, there is certainly energy which is used to create the lime.
Yep.
However, when lime is created, carbon dioxide is burnt off. But as lime carbonates and it sets slowly, it actually reabsorbs carbon dioxide.
Right.
In terms of looking at CO2 emissions, different researchers have said between a positive of 24 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per cubic metre to a negative of 106 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per cubic metre. So it depends on what methodology you use.
Yeah.
As a comparison, I mean, that's a lot better than most conventional materials. So if you're building out a brick house, you'd be looking at carbon emissions of between 113 and 503.
Wow.
Those CO2 equivalent per cubic metre, but probably not as good as something like a straw bale house.
Yeah.
Because the straw bale, particularly if you're using clay renders rather than lime, it's got between negative 128 and negative 165
Yeah.
kilos of CO2 per cubic metre. So it's good, and it's certainly a lot better than a lot of our conventional building
Yep.
materials.
Yep.
Not as good as some other materials available, but one of the things I would say is that hempcrete is more adaptable to conventional building practices.
Yep.
It can use a standard timber frame that you would use in a brick veneer or a clad building. So the same
Yeah.
frame, you can run all your services through first. So it's much easier for your trades to sort of understand and work with that material. I'm not going to I think straw bale is still really great, but you need to put a lot more thought into how you run your services through those walls.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's a big part of the scalability of any system. If it can be easily done and the existing builders can get their head around it and do it, then that's going to have a much better uptake.
I think in terms of scalability, it's really exciting now to see hempcrete in Australia actually moving beyond just residential projects. It's being used in the University of Tasmania building, and also the Mildura powerhouse. Actually, it was a adaptive reuse of an existing building, and they used hempcrete there, and that's actually won a number of awards. So it's really
So how much was that like a rebuilding of walls? What was repurposed?
So they used I wasn't actually, it's not my project.
No.
Anna Maskell was actually behind that one. But they had an existing, I can't really tell you all the details of it, but it was part of an existing sort of building, but there were certainly a number of new hempcrete walls
Right.
built in that project.
Yeah. But I mean, that totally makes sense. If there's the bulk of a structure is still good, and then you can essentially infill that frame with everything that does all of your insulation and weatherproofing and everything else, then that's a fantastic option.
It's one of those things that we have in Australia a number of houses which were constructed using asbestos fibro cement.
Yeah, yeah,
and asbestos is a problem. It's okay while it's sort of bonded and in the house, but you can't drill it, you can't cut it.
yeah.
So if anyone's doing any renovations, it's a real problem. And ideally, it's remove the asbestos because then it removes that risk. But I have had projects where we have removed all of the asbestos, and basically those asbestos houses usually have no or very little insulation in them.
Yep.
And you reuse that original timber frame and infilled it with hempcrete.
Awesome. Where to from here, particularly for you? You've got your own practice. Is that just you at the moment?
No, there's 3 of us. So
awesome.
We're working hard.
Yeah. So what's the interest like, and where do you see things going from here?
In terms of that, I think there is quite a wide interest in natural building materials and hempcrete in particular. And I see that because I would say that probably 80% of our projects are now hempcrete, and have been doing hempcrete projects not just in my area but in various places around Australia. What I've been really keen and what I really like is that a number of those projects are actually going to be Passive House certified.
Nice.
So it's really exciting that people are looking at high performance building and considering natural building materials, because that's one of the criticisms that's often levelled at Passive House, is that it doesn't take into consideration the embodied energy that is used in the materials to create the building. And so if you're looking at using natural building materials and creating a high performance building which is going to be low energy in use, then it's a double win.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Really great stuff. I mentioned to you earlier that your presentation at the New Zealand Natural Building or Earth Building Conference was a hit. Got a lot of positive feedback from that. So well done. Where can people find out more about what you're up to and follow you?
Well, they can also have a look at our website, which is www.shelterbuildingdesign.com.au. But if you are interested in hemp building materials and hemp building generally, I'd also urge people to have a look at the Hemp Building Directory, which is another initiative of mine together with a colleague, Jeremy Thomas, because we found that a lot of people were trying to connect with builders and suppliers. They were interested in building out of hemp, but they just didn't know where to go.
Yep.
So we've actually set up a directory which covers Australia and New Zealand as well.
Excellent.
So you can go online and it's hempbuilding.au or hempbuilding.nz, depending which country you're in. Awesome.
Hey, well, thank you very much, Kirstie. Really appreciate it, and great job with what you're doing and inspiring people, and also with that already achieving some Passive House results as well. It's really good stuff. That was Kirstie Wulf, who is the director and founder of shelterbuildingdesign.com.au. And she also runs a directory of natural buildings, as she pointed out there. Really great. I really enjoyed that. I guess I have been a little bit skeptical of things like straw bale and hempcrete, and even people I know that I've talked to about things like clay, and even hearing about natural lime plasters, which is kind of unfounded, because when you look into those materials, they're pretty amazing. And I think it's just this concept of being able to go to the store, or the hardware store, and buy a panel which is consistent size, it's been verified, it's got all the standards, it's got stamps of approval, and the sticks of wood that are straight and similarly, they've been tested and they've got certain specifications, whereas natural materials don't always have that, and they're not as marketable or marketed to us in the industry, yet they do have some pretty phenomenal properties, which Kirstie explained. And I think really starting to change my mind on whether I would choose to use some of those products if I was, have the opportunity to build a home. And I'm starting to come around to the idea.
I was compelled by her observation that hempcrete is compatible with standard building practice. I mean, that was a great point, that you can still do, you can still stick built construction, and the hempcrete kind of fills it, but also ends up wrapping the structure. So dealing with the thermal bridging, I was confused by a couple of numbers and terms. So one term is, what is a cubby house?
That'll be like a playhouse, like
Okay.
a
All right.
little
Like a tree
kids
house or
tree house, or yeah.
Okay. And then R values, those are really small R values from our, we like bigger R values here in the United States.
Yeah, you
So
do.
R 3.5,
Yeah, you do.
R 4.2, tell me about those, please.
Well, 3.5, that would be fairly familiar to the rest of the world, but for our special North American colleagues, that would be about 20.
Okay.
And of course, the inverse of that would be the U value, which we should probably be talking about to make it even make more sense. But yeah, so 3.5 is the metric R value, and that's quite high. A typical wall in a lot of Australia would not be required to be anywhere near that, and even here in New Zealand, a lot of walls are 1.8 or 2. So to get up to 3.5 is pretty amazing. The thing I like about, and I really like that idea of something that just wraps around the structure as well, because there's so many benefits to that, of looking after the structure, dealing with moisture, keeping it warm. But there's been a lot of discussion recently about the increasing complexity of walls as we try and make the walls do everything it needs to do in terms of all those control layers, like the liquid water, the vapor control, the air control, and then you've got the structure in there and everything else. So to have one material or one mixture of materials, which is the hempcrete, be able to do all of that is pretty phenomenal, and I think really, really appealing, because it simplifies the whole process, but you're still getting all those benefits of all the control layers. And as Kirstie pointed out, there's some really good resilience properties of that material.
Right, both fire resilience and flood resilience as well,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
was surprising. And that fire resilience is top of mind for us here
yep,
at the Accelerator. We're about to do our big Reimagine Buildings conference focused on fire resilience, called Designing for Fire Resilience, on March 14th. That's online. So if you're interested in that, you can go to the Passive House Accelerator website and register for that, or join the Reimagine Buildings Collective, and you get complimentary access to it. But to combine that with natural materials, low embodied carbon, the air tightness, thanks to the render, was just really like, what's not to like. I would love for anybody who has a different perspective on hempcrete to let us know at
yeah.
podcast@passivehouseaccelerator.com.
Tell us why
And
we
we
shouldn't
can,
use it.
yeah, exactly. I'm sure that
It
there are
does.
some opinions out there, and we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, it does sound very cool. And Kirstie mentioned this, but I'm also really interested in the evolution of modular components, and I guess more productization of some of these materials into a more standard, consistent platform. I know that is not all of the attraction to some of these for some people, but there are some significant benefits from a supply chain of having standard modules, and we're seeing this with straw bales, where you get straw bale panels, and I think that's a good way for the industry as it stands right now to start getting their head around some of these materials in a way that they're more used to working with, because they've also got to you got to bring everyone else along with you on that journey as well, whether it's the local authority who's got to sign everything off to the end consumer who's got to be attracted to it. If they're not driving it, then you've got to sell them on it, of course, as well. So I think it's an exciting space, and we should also quickly mention the carbon benefits are pretty significant for some of these materials like straw and hemp. Pretty hard to beat in terms of their carbon, and we can debate the accuracy of those numbers, but it kind of doesn't matter because there's orders of magnitude better than some of the alternatives, particularly if you're comparing it to things like concrete and even timber. A lot of timber. It relies on so much land that the environmental credentials of these materials are pretty impressive.
Absolutely, and back to that market adoption and industry adoption of these natural materials and hempcrete in particular. There's that famous bell curve that shows the early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards.
Yeah.
Well, Kirstie certainly is an early adopter, and just like
She
the
is.
story, can we take a moment to celebrate again that can-do spirit of just like, I'm just gonna build one of these, and it's just you just have to like focus on put it into bite-sized pieces. What's the big deal? It's so cool. So cool.
It makes me feel bad about procrastinating, just fixing my deck or my front steps. I'm like,
feeling somewhat unworthy. Yeah. But that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
Awesome. All right. Well, what have we got coming up over on the accelerator?
Yeah, so I mentioned the Designing for Fire Resilience conference on March 18th. That's the big event that we're gunning for, and half the proceeds of that from ticket sales will go to a relief agency in Los Angeles focused on supporting families affected by the fires. Great lineup of folks, and it's going to be we're going to have a lot of people at this conference. It's we're getting lots of people signing up, so that's going to be a lot of fun. On the 101, it's very apropos to this conversation we just had, the Passive House Accelerator Live 101, which is on Wednesday, March 5th. We're having Lindsay Love of Regenerative Building Solutions present 101 Insulating with Natural Materials. So we're going to dive into more natural materials with probably a focus on straw and straw panels, and Designing for Fire Resilience on the 14th. And we got a Cascadia Windows and Doors Component Spotlight coming up in April, and of course lots of programming in between. Also on the Reimagine Buildings Collective, we just opened the doors to a new course by Ed May, very comprehensive dive into the Honeybee PH suite of software. This is all open source software that supports data flow between different modeling software, BIM software, passive PHPP, Woofy Passive, to allow more accurate and efficient delivery of passive house buildings. So if that is interesting to you and you want to dive into that, you can join the Reimagine Buildings Collective and have free access to over 30 hours of instruction and cohort-based learning and office hours with Ed May to answer your questions about the course. I think that's pretty much it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So much good stuff. If you want to know more about the Reimagine Buildings Collective, head on over to passivehouseaccelerator.com. There's a big button up in the top menu. Join RB Collective. You can check it out there. And there's just so much good stuff in there that's live, but also pre-recorded, and lots of resources that stick around that you can refer back to. So it's great value with all the training that's in there as well. So get into it. All right. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you, Matthew.
We will be back again next week on the Passive House Podcast.